Welcome from me, Nick Gowing, to China and the port city of Dalian, an hour's flying time east of Beijing. We're here for a first, an unprecedented world debate about China taking place inside China without any restrictions on us. The sights and sounds below me highlight the breathtaking economic growth in this country, but the stresses and strains created by this head-spinning rush for growth are profound. Increasingly, they are potentially catastrophic for this enormous country of 1.3 billion people, especially, as you can see from the pollution here, when it comes to the environment. How much is all this challenging the system itself? In this world debate we ask, is China's growth sustainable? In history, no other country has grown at anything like the pace of China today. The Communist Party and the government say this is about creating a new, what they call, harmonious socialist society. Tens of millions are benefiting, often ostentatiously. But many, including in this richer city of Dalian, still experience little of the new wealth. It's even worse for hundreds of millions out in the countryside. Official policy says China is blazing a new path to industrialization. It says it must be energy efficient, environment friendly, wholly coordinated and sustainable. But in much of the country, the reality is precisely the opposite, and already potentially disastrous. The data available is frightening, and here's a snapshot of some of it. China's carbon dioxide emissions are now bigger than in the United States. 595 cities have unhealthy air. 16 are classified as being among the world's worst polluted. Acid rain falls on 1/4 of China's landmass. 10% of farmland is so polluted that the Land and Resources Ministry says there is a severe threat to food production. 70% of water in 5 of the 7 major river systems is unsuitable for humans. 80% of sewage goes untreated. And finally, a relentless increase in public protests. The last official figures reveal 87,000 protests in 2005. Interestingly, no official figures since. The BBC World Debate: is China's growth sustainable? Well, just a few hours before we gathered here in this very room, China's Prime Minister Wen Jiabao confirmed to business and politician delegates here at the World Economic Forum that frankly, and that was the word he used, frankly, China faces a host of intertwined problems, as he put it. He said there's a weak economic foundation and excessively rapid economic growth. But sorting out the massive environmental challenges he described as facing entrenched structural and institutional obstacles. He then added intriguingly, without political reform, and I'm quoting him here, without political reform, including expanding what he called people's democracy, economic reform will not succeed. So, what are the implications of all of this, particularly what we've heard from the Prime Minister? I'm joined by Fan Gang, who is director of China's National Economic Research Institute. It's a non-governmental research institute. It inputs into official policy thinking. C.S. Kiang is founding dean of the College of Environment Services at Beijing University. He now chairs the Environment Fund to develop leadership to tackle China's critical environmental challenges. Harvey Chen, you're president and founder of the First Light Academy in Shanghai, which trains the next generation of business managers. Dr. Chen has worked for a large US investment bank, the International Monetary Fund, and taught at the London School of Economics. Christine Lowe, you head the non-governmental organisation Civic Exchange, which is a public policy institute, a think tank that focuses on China's sustainability challenges based in Hong Kong. Wu Xing is an independent people's deputy for the Haidan district of Beijing and also for Beijing Municipal People's Congress at the same time. You're a campaigner for civil society rights and for rural women. Dalian is chairman of H&Q Asia Pacific, based in Shanghai, a private equity firm investing more than $2 billion, $2.3 billion in new business opportunities for this region. And you have to make hard judgments about what works in China and what doesn't. Bert Hoffman, lead economist at the World Bank in Beijing, where you head up analysis of data and trends in this enormous country. And Pierre Cohade joins us from the multinational corporate area. You can give us a multinational corporate view, Pierre. Asia-Pacific president for Goodyear tires, with a factory here in Dalian, producing 6 million tires a year, half for Chinese sales and half for the international market. Well, welcome to you all. Now, I'd like to go to Fang Gang first. Let's look at the official language we've heard here and in the build-up in the last few weeks. The official language from the president downwards talks of the aims of a harmonious socialist society. How much are all those principles now really under stress and pressure?
I think in the past couple of years, this government really put quite a lot of things in the practice. For example, they did a lot of things to cut down the burdens of the farmers, increase the spending on the social programs, on the rural programs, on primary education. Increasingly, they're working on these environmental problems. But I would say, as Wen Jiabao said, there is a lot of the institutional barriers for those kind of things. The consensus have been built up in kind of the concept, but how to put it in a practice, particularly in all the local places, is still an issue, particularly for the environmental issues.
Is this an acceptance that really things have not moved fast enough in the last year?
Actually, you can say there is a consensus in the leadership, but it's very hard to have a consensus among the people, among the different regions. Now, the good news is that in the cities, the new so-called middle class or rich classes, now they are more aware of these environmental issues. Well, but in the remote areas, when the people still in the poverty, sometimes it's hard.
But let me move this even further. When we hear the Prime Minister here 24 hours ago saying, as he did, entrenched structural and institutional obstacles, what are these obstacles? Christine Lowe.
It's hard here because of the great number of people, the great country, and the diversity we have. But what we need to do next in China is to build the capacity and the understanding for governance, institution, and systemic reform. And that's hard.
But are you feeling from the kind of language that we're hearing from the political leadership that there's a realization that time is not on the side of China with this unbalanced economy?
Well, I think we need to cut short that time in order for this country to continue to develop in the national language in a peaceful rise, but also in terms of international relations.
Now, Bert Hoffman, you're from the World Bank. Your job is analyzing the data here. Tell me what you're preparing for your next report. Is it all dark and bleak, intertwined problems really threatening the viability of this massive economic growth here?
Well, clearly there's problems, and the Prime Minister is the first one to recognize. But I think there's also a lot of progress. As a matter of fact, a lot of people seem to forget how bad the environmental problems were 15, 20 years ago. As a matter of fact, most of the cities, the air in the cities has improved since then. About half of the pollution is there compared to 20 years ago. Water pollution has improved, especially in the southern rivers, where none of the rivers met any of the quality standards.
Yet there are still appalling statistics out there.
There are, and the damage done by pollution is still very high. But don't forget that this is a country with a $2,000 per capita income. China is now addressing this at a much earlier stage than most other countries in the West. The OECD started addressing it at the end of the 60s, early 70s, when they had $15,000 per capita on average. China has $2,000 per capita.
But I think that environmental conditions are the deterioration is much more extensive today.
I'm not sure. The London, remember the London fog and the LA smog? It was very bad in those days as well, also in the United States and also in the UK. And it took a long time, as a matter of fact. The first big smog incident in LA was in 1943. The Clean Air Act was in 1970. So it took a long time to turn that country around. And there was a lot of resistance there as well.
I mean, it does take a long time, but I think what I'm trying to say is that in China, we look 20 years. The environmental conditions today, I think, are worse than it was 20 years ago. Now, we have to catch up, and there are great examples, I think, around the world where we know what the solutions are.
If you look at the energy consumption, which is highlighted, the problem really turned to be so bad since 2002. It took a big turn upward in terms of consumption. Even if they follow the energy the intensity of the before 2002, I think they can gain another 50% of the increase of GDP without the damage.
I agree entirely. My point is simply that we need to shorten this period of time for China to do the things that the world already knows how to do it.
Is it your reading that the political leaders, here we are just a few weeks before this critical 5-year party congress, have now gripped this and there's a consensus?
Well, you still hear from a lot of resistance from the provinces, especially the poorer provinces, because they say, hey, we haven't had our chance yet, and we still need to grow. And China actually had a very, very successful growth model. Now, switching that to a more balanced model is pretty hard. For the leadership, they work still through the administrative measures and through the administrative system, which in my view and in our view will take time to shape up, and it will take time to establish the rule of law. It will take time for local governments to follow those rules. Meanwhile, the central government has other means as well, such as taxation, such as pricing, such as the exchange rate, to adjust the economy in a more balanced pattern. And they're not using it that effectively yet.
But Fan Gang, picking up Christine Lowe's point, this idea of shortening the timeline, is it your belief that really the political class here and the government have locked into the vital necessity and imperative to do that?
It'll take time, and for 1.3 billion, it's supposed to be longer than others. I believe China will move quite quick. Maybe not as quick as a lot of people demand it, but in the historical point of view, I think it will be quicker compared to the other developed countries in the world, in the history.
Let me get two views from the grassroots here. Christine Lowe, you come from Hong Kong. What's your belief about the way the average Chinese person is seeing the urgency of this? Do they want growth, development, cars, washing machines, or do they want that pollution cleared up?
Well, I think what we need is to make sure that economic development and environmental cleanup now goes together. The last phase was this belief, and it's not just Chinese, that we need to get rich before we can clean up the environment. Now, today, I think the world knows we need to push economic development and using clean environment as a key driver. So in southern China, where we have a tremendous export manufacturing business, we have a tremendous number of Hong Kong, Taiwanese, and other multinational people investing and manufacturing there. What we need is to find an effective way to implement the law as well as the right kind of incentives to get them to clean up faster.
But those incentives are beginning to come in with taxation and other tax breaks, aren't they?
That's right. So I think those are the right things. And perhaps I'm going to suggest something some people won't like. There are extra jurisdictional means as well, because in Hong Kong, is it possible to think of prosecuting actually polluters who are from Hong Kong polluting in the Pearl River Delta?
But let me just ask you about one bit of detail. The fact is that this is beginning to have an impact on those smaller and very dirty businesses in the Pearl River Delta, north of Hong Kong. It's beginning to force them out.
Well, that's right. And, that's just tough in a way. They are trying to bargain for leeway of a slightly longer period. But I think people in Hong Kong, they also know they do have to clean up.
Let me pick up with Pierre Cohade. The government keeps blaming the foreign firms, the big multinationals, and saying you're responsible, it's not a Chinese problem.
Well, the fact that our Dalian factory is today the highest quality factory in Goodyear around the world, and as you said, has significantly reduced its consumption of energy and has eliminated contamination such that we call it a green factory, has been driven because it's good business. And I see many other companies around me doing the same.
The Chinese companies?
Chinese companies and foreign companies. Chinese companies today are very eager to improve their manufacturing process, improvement in efficiency, improvement in cleanliness. For all the reasons explained, some of it is enforcement. I like the example given by Christine Lowe. Some of it is just the laws of economics. And we are getting increasing requests from our Chinese-based suppliers to get some assistance and help to control their manufacturing process.
I can see Professor C.S. Kiang sitting here, nodding agreement here. I mean, you've been very critical. Would you accept that there are changes underway and significantly at the moment?
Yeah, I think China is at the crossroad. If you want to leave to another stage of the economic development, then you need a knowledge-based economic development. That's what he called the new economic and innovation economic. So I think the climate change, the environment, could provide an opportunity, not just a crisis. The reason because the environment itself is generating new business. And I think about the whole world, not only just China, that maybe it's the time the environment drives the economics.
I'm an economist. I believe in the market solution. Now, we talk about the government, the central government's clear understanding and commitment to the environmental issues from Premier Wen's speech and everybody. But then you need to make it work down the different levels of government. There's a misreading of the Chinese political institution. That is, when the central government decides, it can be implemented automatically. No, China has a matrix local organization that needs to be incentivized like a market player to carry out this work. So whether China can do it quickly or not depends on whether the system can introduce an incentive mechanism for local government to respond to the environmental pressures. And one of the hope that I can see is that China has been so successful to attract foreign investment at the local government level because they have been measured by their performance, the amount of dollars they attract, politically and financially. So my task is to educate the private sector, the businessmen, to understand that there might be an opportunity, not the cost on the environmental side. And we actually see cases that companies actually, having been taught about this whole view of a global view, of an environmental view, they started to think about, well, this could be an opportunity.
But what about those in your academy, the Chinese who are coming to your academy, maybe mid-career, maybe early career? Are they thinking about only making profit, or are they thinking about sustainability and the environment?
Well, I think one of the byproducts of China's market economy and open is that everybody recognizes making profit is the number one objective or overriding one. So that's something we are going to change. We try to educate people with corporate social responsibility and the global impacts. And that's kind of hard right now, but I think as we move along, when the whole system moves along, the politics and the organizations, then I will see that the companies will find a reason.
Most important thing is negative incentive, that is the punishment. The corporate people will take this into their decision-making, profitability decision-making, only if, I believe, in addition to the social responsibility sense, if they are going to pay the cost, if they are doing damaging in the environment. So that's what I mean, to institutionalize these goals and to reform the institutions to really put this kind of the legal framework there and let people get punished. From that point of view— What do you mean by
punish? You mean with taxation or with
taxation,
fines?
the fines, you will be caught. And then your reputations also not the financial, only the financial punishment, also the social punishment.
Because one of the issues is, if you get caught, you get fined, but you don't get fined very much.
That's
and
not
it's
enough.
much more profitable to take the risk.
That's right. So that's the key issue now here. You need to have the equilibrium, the balance in the legal framework, in the system, and then the people will behave according to that constraints.
But what about the reality? People have said to me, in a place like the Pearl River Delta, it's all very well closing down these factories or moving them out. The problem is just being moved to a poorer area, which is now going to inherit the problem. Is that the case?
I think that's why we do need to clean up. And let us not forget, some of the manufacturers are also moving outside China to Cambodia and to Vietnam. And if they were to just continue to pollute, that really isn't the answer. But as far as China is concerned, I think by implementing the law consistently, and this is a governance reform, by also bringing multi-stakeholders together, if we want to be more innovative, one of the things we need to do is to understand the processes, what we call brain surfing and all that is done in the private sector, and to also take that to the public sector in terms of how we deal with gathering good governance ideas, how we get civil society and government involved together with business. And then, of course, there's an international picture. When we're talking about climate change, we're talking about having that kind of more innovative, more open, more honest discussion. So these are the tools, the soft tools, that we need to have these conversations, identify solutions, and then have the governance mechanisms to implement them.
But can we be clear among all of you, are you comfortable that the laws essentially in this country are in place?
Yes, I feel the system itself has to be changed. because now our legal system is not independent. So when some of the law, those civil cases taken to the court, it can never be solved because there's local protectivism. And then when the party people said something, then it could never win. There should be democracy and rule of law in the party itself, and then our legal system has to be independent, and there should be a constitutional court. But so far we don't have one. And then the media is not independent. So it's very, very difficult to get things, genuine information across. So I think our system has to be changed, and that's why I think it's important to have a specific agenda for democracy and rule of law in China, or else it's going to be big problems.
C.S. Kiang, do you see this? There are 500 million mobile phones in this country, 5% growth, extraordinary numbers, bigger than America and Europe put together. Do you see this as having an impact on the perception and the knowledge of what is happening, particularly on economic growth and the environment?
I think I have a much better opportunity than ever before, so-called to get the process going, or you call the conflict resolution process going, because the people are participating. People get the information, and the news media actually is much more an open and also report. Even though in the environmental issue, everybody said before, you even never heard about it. Nowadays, you can hear about 3 or 4 times per day about accidents. So I think sometimes they recognize the problem, and then that's the first thing, then try to find a resolution. I think the conflict resolution process actually happened in China.
Christine Lowe, are you seeing that in the Pearl River Delta and the area you look at, this level of empowerment?
Well, that's a very rich area in China. There's lots going on. It's a more developed area. And I think that this area in Hong Kong, Macau, southern China, this could also be pilot projects for greater governance and political reform. We already have a freer media in the south. Again, I think these are advantages that southern China have that the country can build upon. Assertion of rights in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a part of China. We have a different court system. It's very special for any country that you can have one country with 2 systems. Again, these are some of the leverage points that China can use to further experiment with very difficult institutional governance structures.
If I put to you, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 3rd report this year, said very clearly all the technology that is needed to dramatically reduce greenhouse gases is available now.
When I look at the next 10 years, one of the big questions that is facing us is how are we going to move the goods and the people across China? Is there a better way than just doing highways and putting trucks on them? And trust me, I like trucks. I sell tires for trucks. But eventually, we know what happens. And we know that highways and trucks is the most convenient, but not necessarily the best way of moving people and goods.
We all hope there is some leap, from the traditional technology to the new technology, as long as it is cheaper enough to make the people to make the choices. But I think the current technology still not really provide that kind of the opportunities for
But
people.
this is a country which is
we need
heading for innovation.
Yeah, and that's my second point. The second point is this is actually in China's interest, in Chinese people's interest, because we need badly the fuel efficiency. First of all, we have the constraint of the resource scarcity, particularly the energy scarcity. So if new type of technology, including these hyper things, can provide a real economic opportunity for options for people.
Harvey Chen, with the entrepreneurs, these businessmen, the directors and others you are training at every level of their career, are they thinking beyond the immediate profit, thinking beyond and making that great leap into some new technological innovation?
Not yet. I think we are counting too much on technology. Technology for fuel efficiency is there for many years. The alternative energy technology is there. Why it is not being used? This is what we call a market failure. And also, another part of the whole equation is the consumers have to change their values, their preferences.
How does that
they
happen?
are changing now. So
how does that happen in China when those who are struggling to get an apartment are also struggling to get a car. How do you change those habits?
Well, we don't have to change. Clearly, I don't agree with the idea that the people who are less educated, people who are in the farms are less sensitive to the environment. I just went to south central China in a very poor farm. I saw the farmers are very, very sensitive to the water there being polluted. Okay, they struggle to find other means to drink. So they are concerned about it. The issue is the whole world has over 50% of the population living under $2 a day. The whole business community worldwide, it's a global issue, should find ways to sell into them, to provide them with some consumption goods. And that's a big business. And I think that can be worked out.
Why should we change the people's demand for things? Particularly for the developing country people, for the poor people, they never had the chance to have those things. So now they want to have those things. So the issue, I think, is not stop the development, but the issue is how we make things better and how we make the things itself more environmentally friendly.
But in part, in a socialist market economy, that will go through the price mechanism, and it's because it's in China's interest. But I must say, the scary thought, in my view, is that even if China adopts the Japanese technology and it grows rich, it will still produce too much greenhouse gases and too much emission for the world to actually deal with it. And that's the problem for the world. That's the problem. The problem for China is the air pollution, the local air pollution, solving that, taxing that, and that can resolve a lot. It cannot solve this technological leap that you're talking about, which I think is necessary to solve that global problem of which China is part.
We need to do two things at the same time. One is to use the technology that we already have and to make sure that our economic incentives encourage people to adopt higher ways of, less polluting ways of doing things. Secondly, of course, the world doesn't stop, and people do want to invest in new technology that will transform the Industrial Revolution. But we need to do both and not focus on just the sexy part of new technology and forget about what we can do right now.
C.S. Kiang.
I think China talk about new technology is needed. Another thing I would like to just say, we cannot repeat the same way of the growth of the past, of the West. If everybody owned a car in China as much as American, we need a full earth of the land. If you have a paper consumption, just like American, we need 3 earths of the planet, of the forest. So we cannot afford it. So I just want to say,
so how does every person in China, every Chinese citizen who aspires to a car, how do they get a car which doesn't create this demand for 3 more planets?
I think certain kind of mindset, there may be a different way. Not only you say you produce car, there are tremendous of the electrical bicycle coming out. So last year you have 20 million of them, and this next year maybe 100 million of them, and maybe they have a new model of transportation. And then you can have a speed. In the meantime, you have a car, only go to the sightseeing during the weekend. So sometimes also Chinese make a car to sell the car to the outside and in order to create a job. So maybe a different strategy.
My understanding is China is not following the U.S. model.
Yeah.
Just build highways, buying tires, okay, and neglect the mass transit. I think the train system is being implemented. Just give them a few years. You will have a fairly good and rapid rail system. So that the concept we hope can be implemented is in the city, maybe drive the small electric cars. India is pushing that direction.
Yeah.
In fact, our battery R&D work and the pilot production are all aimed at the Indian market this morning from China.
Let me pick up finally on the point I raised of what the Prime Minister said in this room a few hours ago when he was talking about continuing to advance political reform, expanding people's democracy. Now, political reform, people's democracy, what's on the agenda here? Wu Xing.
To me, I feel the most important thing is rule of law, then is to use the Constitution of the People's Republic of China. Because since 2004, 2 very important concepts have been added. Like in Article 33, it has added that the state respects and protects human rights. And then in Article 13, it has added the state protects private property. So I think these are some of the very important concepts.
But what is behind that carefully weighed 2 words, people's democracy. What does that mean? What does democracy mean here? This is coming from the leadership of the government and the party.
To me, I feel democracy means people's participation at grassroots, and it should be bottom up, and then top down they should meet somewhere, not just top down total control. I think that's very important.
Is that accepted, do you believe, by the political leadership?
But it takes time, because I think now the leaders at the top will not accept that. Why? Because of our culture. Our culture is family-oriented. At home, the daddy has the final say. So it has always been top-down. So I think it will take time.
But let me press you and all of you. When the Prime Minister on other occasions has talked about the value of democracy and steps to political openness, can we speculate what he means? Christine
Well,
Lowe.
I think one of the things that China needs to do is to be just more open and transparent with information. Secondly, is to allow circulation of information through the media. And thirdly, is to transform the culture of the state secret system so that people don't feel so afraid, to have much more open discussions. And then, of course, lastly, and I'm not talking about a Western kind of democracy, because I don't think that's going to happen anytime very soon here, but nevertheless, it is possible, I think, to devise a kind of system where there's a lot more dialogue in the middle. Yeah. And I think that's what ordinary Chinese citizens would accept, at least at this stage. But it requires them to feel safe to be able to participate openly and honestly and have that kind of dialogue with government officials.
What is moving here then, do you believe, C.S. Kiang?
I believe the conflict resolution process is going on. I believe the stakeholders are able to participate, and those kind of participation is a part of the process of democracy.
Pierre Cohade, as an outsider, you don't have a vote here, you just have a stake in a business.
Well, we have a stake in, I live in China, so I live, breathe, and drink in China. I was going to say that we all understand all the long road that China has ahead of itself, but there has been some very encouraging changes in recent years. For example, the consultation process. I don't know many governments that post on the internet their proposed legislation and for 18 months consult with all stakeholders until it is being adopted by the People's Congress. And I'm speaking about, for example, the new labor legislation. I could speak about other legislation that is being posted on the web and where stakeholders can input into the decision-making process. That does not happen in the country I come from. So that's one thing that I found to be very encouraging. I live in Shanghai in Shanghai district. The deliberation of the administration is being posted on the web. And again, anyone that wants to consult what has happened the night before can do it on the web. Now, we all understand that it may not be entirely transparent, but it's certainly not more transparent than many other countries where you cannot access those things.
Harvey Chen, what's your belief? Help us decode the language that's being used right from the top, literally a month before the 5-year Party Congress.
Don't expect China will become overnight a parliamentary democracy. In my personal opinion, if you look at the whole human history, parliamentary democracy is the best form of politics that has been invented by human beings. The Soviet Union tried another model and failed. And whether China is going to that direction with the end in it, or China is trying to develop its own. Madame Wu mentioned about this Chinese family idea, and I think this is a very different social structure that we have as our heritage, and whether that can be built upon as a new form of government to the human civilization, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I think China is in the process of experimenting with economic reforms and political reforms, which is going to be unique, at least during the process.
How much is this being driven by the new information technology realities of 500 million mobile phones, this level of connectivity? We saw, I think, on the 1st of June, 1 million text messages sent out for an environmental protest, and 20,000 people did actually attend that protest. Is that pushing this change, this political reform that the Prime Minister is talking about? Christine Lowe.
Yes, I think all these factors. Also that as Chinese nationals become more connected with the world, they see that there are different ways of organizing things.
Isn't it about being connected with themselves?
Well, I think it's one world, one dreams, but many ways of expression. And it's about the country, the political system, being willing to deal with these many colors in a way that don't threaten people and their rights.
So let me draw these threads together. Where is the convergence going to be? Fan Gang.
I think eventually you need an institution secure all the development and social needs, environmental needs. And how you have a solid institution, you have to have a political system to secure that institution to work and to enforce the laws. So that's where I think that meet. Economic development, economic reform, and the political reforms eventually.
Wu Xing, where do you see the convergence between political reform and economic reform, given what the Prime Minister has said?
I think the most important thing is diversity. Let different voices be heard, and there should be different representations from the stakeholders, like women, the migrants, because the migrants are underrepresented, or they have no representative. So I think we have to strengthen the People's Congress system. And the party, I think most important thing is the Communist Party should respect the Constitution.
Dalian,
I hope I can talk about the view of, I'm very confused about the whole situation. I grew up in Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek, Jiang Jingguo, which did not have full democracy. Taiwan advanced rapidly, was the miracle, economic miracle of the world. Everything you talk about in China happened 30-some years ago in Taiwan. And then democracy came in, okay? Now, if anybody followed the Taiwan news, you know there's chaos. Nobody invests in Taiwan. The life quality deteriorating.
C.S. Kiang.
If you really want to reform, you have to be transparent, you have to rule by law, you have to respect the intellectual property. I think that this is a natural process. This political reform is followed on the economic reform and reach to another stage. Survival is the fundamental principle of China. And I think about our premier, maybe talk about the so-called democratic process. Could be imply Chinese characteristic. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's different.
As an outsider, let me ask the question, though, which I'm sure is on many people's minds, but not often talked about here. Is this about a concern within the party, about the way it is viewed and how it can manage economic reform?
Yes, let me go back to the question whether these two things are converging. And I think this is a very Western scientific analytical question.
Well, give me the Chinese analytical
view. The Chinese one is more like Dr. Fan Gang's. Now, we are doing rapid reform somewhere, but then we have to hold this whole thing stable. Stability is a key ingredient of the rapid reform. And what do we want to hold stable so that we can do rapid reforms? And he mentioned maybe the political system, but I don't believe that's the case because I see political reform has been moving along, even though it's not spoken and announced openly, that it's gradually moving. But then on the surface, you have to say, we are a communist country, we're a socialist market economy. You cannot deviate from that statement, just like Secretary Rubin of the United States. Since he invented the word strong dollar policy, his successors could not deviate from that. Everybody knows that's at the surface. So.
Is it a different form of socialism which is now developing?
I don't think so. I think it's a market economy. That's for sure.
I think democracy usually in Chinese language means democracy within the party. So it is the deliberation within the party that should have its quality. And I do believe that there has been a lot of politicking at earlier forks in the reform. It wasn't easy to introduce the market system, heavily debated politically. It wasn't easy to introduce the macroeconomic reforms in 1993. It wasn't easy to do state enterprise reforms in 1997-98. And it wasn't easy to get private property into the constitution. It's not that there's no politics, it's an enormous political debate in the party. So I do think and in the end, what I've observed, what the World Bank has observed, that in the end China finds the way to do the right thing to move forward. And so I also believe that is going to happen on these big issues of environmental strains and inequality, creating the harmonious society.
Wu Xing, you sit in 2 congresses in Beijing. Right. Do you think the incremental way will produce a level of reform and change which converges with the real challenges of economic reform, some say the catastrophic, potentially catastrophic challenges of economic reform?
You know, to me, I feel economic reform and political reform are like the two legs of a person. They have to go side by side. But I feel now China is in the right direction in terms of rule of law, because I being here shows that. Or I've been getting re-elected 7 times, though there's been very strong opposition from the party to get me out of it. And yet people just wanted to have me in here. So I feel that once people know about their rights, they exercise about their rights, they claim about their rights, nothing is going to stop them. And that's why I'm quite optimistic about the future.
Let's get some views from those who are here watching the debate with us, please.
Don't you think that in the future, this middle class, which is now not complaining about the communist rule, and they have their car, they have their apartment, they have their washing machine, but they are going richer and bigger, and won't they be the one who will put a democratic pressure on the government?
Pierre Cohade.
Well, the middle class is exploding. There will be an increase from 29 million households to about 100 million households by 2015, considered middle class in China. Every study made has suggested that there are 5 key elements of concern. That is health, environment, education, retirement, and housing. And because of those 5 elements of concern, on average, the middle class of China save 40% of its earnings and put it in the bank. I think that some of the initiatives that the Chinese authorities are looking at, such as the creation of a more efficient and modern capital market, maybe the creation of a social net in cities and the rural areas, potentially the introduction of a more modern financial system, will help this 40% savings being redistributed towards the economy in a much more efficient way, and that will help the environment. Furthermore, we know that these individuals, this middle class, want equality of opportunity. They may not have equality of wealth, but they want equality of opportunity for their children and themselves. And that will be a strong pressure placed on the authorities.
Let me hear from the Chinese voices. Wu Xing, this pressure from the middle class.
There is pressure from middle class, because now I've been getting complaints from people in small communities coming here. They demand better education. That's in the city. Better improve the quality of teaching in some areas, or they want a hospital built. They want a bank there.
I think, in other words, the Chinese are not very unlike many other people. Once we have solved our most basic problems, we do want to go up from the quantity to the quality drive, and to do that, it puts completely different demands on governments.
All right. One more question here, please.
I would like to ask the panel, what do you think should be the main points in the 12th 5-year plan of China government?
Does anyone have a view of what should be in the 12th 5-year plan, which will be in 2011? Avi Chen.
Innovation, I think it would be the key word.
But that's 4 years away at the moment.
Yes.
4 years is a long time when it comes to the dramatic exponential rise that there is here in production of greenhouse gases and the explosion of the economy. Can it wait that long?
Well, I think right now they are addressing the environmental issue. It needs the whole world to come in to do that. But 4 years from now, I think the key phrase will be innovation, because that's when they are really going to address the knowledge economy issue. But right now, it's more setting up the grounds for better systems and institutions and the incentives for the environmental issues.
Christine Lowe.
What I'd like to see in the 12th 5-year plan is for us, or for the country, to have a bigger push on having richer and more developed regions to help other regions. And in this particular case, is for the country to ask the industries and the cities in those areas to accept some kind of capping on things like carbon emissions. This will change the industrial structure and the way the cities operate in those areas. In certain defined areas, this may actually be possible because these are more advanced regions.
But do you find it uncomfortable that you may have to wait 4 or 5 years before that kind of thing is implemented, given the urgency that someone like you in an NGO is identifying?
Well, what I think is in 2009, hopefully China and the world will come to some agreement about what they can commit to for the post-Kyoto regime. So actually, it's the perfect fit for the 12th five-year plan.
Bert Hoffman.
Yeah, no, I think it's too late. I mean, every year, or say 4 years from now, you'll almost have 50% more capacity in energy use, in industrial capacity and in power capacity. So if you do that with the wrong prices, and if you do that with the wrong technologies, it means that for the next 30 years, those factories are going to run. So acting now is very important.
Wu Xing.
I think we should have balanced development. Economy development and environmental protection. And then we also have to think of the development in the rural areas.
Is the framework, though, there already?
Not enough. I don't think we have enough financial backing to help the development in rural areas, because I've been there many times. So you have the policy, but we don't have the money to support that.
Yes, Kiang.
I think China and it's my observation, in China, the five-year plan, not like it used to be, like after 5 years, you stick with it. So I think even after this first year, the 11th 5 year, they readjusted. And I think it's much more flexible than before.
Fan Gang.
Don't expect the revolution every 5 years. Yeah. So there will be continuation of these 5 years. The harmonious society was still the key word, but that include maybe different things.
Can I thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. This has been remarkable that we've had such a vigorous exchange of views here in China, on China, particularly on the issue of what the Prime Minister has called political reform and democracy. Can I thank you all very much indeed. This has been the World Debate from Dalian in China. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here from me, Nick Gowing. Bye-bye.